Kalyan Karnataka, 10 seats. And Congress is 26. The difference is so much. And then Kittur Karnataka, 33 for Congress and 16 for BJP. And then Old Mysuru, 43 and 5. And Central Karnataka, Congress is 15 and BJP 6. Which means that every other place they've gone down. So, which means that in parliamentary election, will it have some kind of an impact? I think
no, but this fallacy, this argument that Ashok Malik, the BJP's vote share hasn't changed. That's a very simplistic reading of the data. I mean, surely you have to introspect much more.
The vote share has certainly changed in various regions.
Regions.
Overall, it may remain at 36%, but it has certainly shifted. The other point I'd like to make is that, we've been talking about index of opposition unity, which is a factor which concerns the BJP today as it used to concern the Congress earlier. The JDS and the Congress were not united. We know that. But is there a bottom-up movement by voters to vote for the strongest non-BJP force and to gravitate away from other smaller parties towards even small shifts here can make dramatic differences in seats.
Absolutely. But I do think, and I wish, normally some BJP leaders are pretty candid about it. I think that's the one worry that they should have. That why are the poorer voters in Karnataka voting against them? Is it simply 1,200 rupees gas cylinder? Is it just a sense of economic distress in a relatively more prosperous state? That's the worry. What happens when you go into states which are less prosperous than Karnataka? Yes, Ali.
Radip, in fact, I am trying to find a simplistic lowest common denominator metric to equalize with the two parties. So the BJP, if I look at the vote shares and what's happened, urban, educated, reasonably rich. The Congress, if you look at the regions we were painting, deep rural, I'm not talking rural, but deep rural, uneducated, poor, if we can define poor, and distanced. So, that seems to be a big narrative, and it's a much deeper narrative than the skin-deep narrative that could say that, there's polarization between castes, there's polarization between religions, etc. Now, this could form the basis of a story.
Yeah, and this is the story that Mr. Chidambaram told us when we interviewed him. When we were looking to 2024, he seemed to suggest that he believes economic distress is far greater than we believe. You simply have to tap into it and provide a credible narrative to convince people that you will give them a better life.
Can I make a small point?
Yes.
This whole talk about the BJP vote share being the same glosses over the fact of unpopularity with the state government. If the vote share has remained the same, we need to budget into that the fact of the central leaders campaign which boosted the Congress vote share. And if you had had a government in the state which was more performing, possibly the vote share of the BJP could have increased.
If one engine is not working, the second engine can't bail you out.
But I'd just like to make a quick point. If there's an anti-incumbency, it cuts across all sections. So I'm not too convinced that this is a rich versus poor election.
No, but Ashok, I think you don't think it's a rich versus poor election. That's simplistic,
I
know.
To some degree that may be true. If you're economically distressed, you will vote against the government. I agree.
But it's not the benefits you will naturally take.
Yes.
And all these freebies.
So maybe those freebies and guarantees worked in a way.
No, I think that just worked a big way.
This is what I'd like to question. The fact that in other elections, the so-called Labharatis had worked very well. But in this, despite when I interviewed Mr. Bommai, he said, look, one of the big things that will get us to victory is that these welfare schemes have reached 5 crore of the 6 crore voters that are there. And therefore, I'm certain of, getting it apart from the social engineering.
Obviously, there was a gap there.
One, so there is some problem that has happened in terms of delivery. Two, if you look at our own exit poll things, female voters have voted much more than male voters have done. And who are the great beneficiaries of these things? It's largely the female voter. So the BJP has to retrospect on this particular thing as to why did they lose when they thought they delivered.
Can I give you an anecdotal example?
And I'm just adding that further. One of the problems now I think the BJP has to confront is what is called welfare fatigue. Right now I think there is an aspirational thing that fine, you've given us all this money.
What next?
Yeah, exactly. When are you going to give me a proper job and where I can earn on myself and not be dependent on the state?
No, that's an important point. But I'll give you another point what happened. An anecdotal. A woman in Gokak outside the temple, she was a flower seller. And we got talking and she was Marathi speaking, so I could speak a little bit more fluently with her. And she told me something that struck me. She told me, 1,200 rupees gas cylinder. Earlier it was 440. She was comparing it to what it was in the Congress regime. Remember, Congress ruled Karnataka for 5 years. So you had a comparison. Then she tells me, Anna Bhagya, under Siddharamaya, I got 10 kilos rice. The center which I found out later, and now I'm getting 5 kilo. Because the central scheme overtook the state scheme. And therefore, the central scheme gave you 5 kilos where earlier you got 10. You see, Siddharamaiah was the kind of leader who could take this message credibly. That's a lesson for the Congress. You know, will Kamal Nath, for example, in Madhya Pradesh be able to carry the same social welfarist messaging as effectively as Siddharamaiah? I'm not so sure. Siddharamaiah had actually delivered on some of these promises.
Let Ashok Malik come in on what Raj Chengappa is calling welfare fatigue. Do you think that exists? If it does, it's a big concern for the BJP. Or is it that, you know, when things go wrong, everything looks wrong. When things are going right, everybody looks like Chanakya. And that's just the way politics is.
You know, I'm reminded of something which Nitish Kumar said after the 2014 state election, parliamentary election. And a lot of people who voted for him in the state election had not voted in the parliamentary election. And somebody asked him, a journalist friend of mine asked him, what happened? These are your voters. He says, we gave them a lot, but now they'll mange more. You know, the voter wants to aspire. So that is certainly a concern which any ruling party would have. And I'm sure the BJP would be alive to that in 2024.
No, also, I think here, the central government is, this thing is already there. So the Congress is giving something more. So let's have that. Yeah. Let's have both.
You know, as we discussed,
park in both your hands.
As we discussed, you can get your 2,000 rupees from your Kisan Samman Nidhi, and you are now getting 2,000 rupees, which the government of Karnataka is also promising. So, I mean, there is that. But I still maintain the Siddharamaiah factor needs to be looked at carefully, because you had a leader who had delivered. The Congress's problem, Rahul, will be who are their other leaders with similar stature, similar mass leaders who can actually convince the voters, I will give you a better deal than the BJP will. That's going to, Mr. Baghel may now, because he's in power. So you see his ads, all of Mr. Baghel's ads are directed towards women.
Both Ashok Gehlot in 2018 and Siddharamaiah now had 5 years of administrative record to show and showcase. So they had a certain credibility.
So, you know, if an Ashok Gehlot can convince people that a Chiranjeevi scheme has actually benefited you in terms of health services, he can at least go to the people with something credible.
One of the big stories of counting day is the fact that yet again, the India Today Access My India post-poll study was bang on. Now a whopping 95% accuracy rate, 60 out of 64 polls in exactly the range that India Today and Access My India